I'm Dr. Ray Dykes, and this is the Personal Faith Program. This is the fifth in a series of presentations, podcasts on personal faith with a passion, how to know what you really believe. And this podcast is entitled, Where Have You Experienced God in Nature and Life Events? Throughout your life, you have experienced God in nature and events of life, outstanding experiences where you felt the presence or absence of God. However, you couldn't or didn't make any belief bricks at the time. Remember belief bricks made by combining the clay of your experience with the straw of religious information. So experiences became a part of your clay, your experiences. You may have been a child when that happened, too immature to draw lasting meaning from them. You may not have had any straw to mix with the clay, any reference point to help you understand the experience. But these were important times which you need to reflect on to draw out the meaning of the experiences and the impact they have had on your spirit. This podcast is about remembering your experiences of nature and life events and massaging your clay. This is a nostalgia trip. It's a touch of theotherapy as opposed to psychotherapy again. Look for the spiritual and obvious and odd places and times. What pictures do you see? Let me give you some scenarios, some places where you may have experienced God. Have you ever experienced God in the dawn of a new day? Do you ever get up and actually watch the sunrise? Perhaps another category, nothing draws more oohs and ahs than a beautiful sunset. The marvelous array of colors, the shapes of clouds, the calmness of dusk, all contribute to the moment of worship and reflection in which you may have experienced the presence of God. Sunrises and sunsets sometimes lead to spiritual awakenings. Have you ever experienced God in an absolutely awesome view? Have you ever been to the north rim of the Grand Canyon? It's an awesome view of the Grand Canyon. It's a religious experience to be there. It's a cathedral of nature. I hope you've had that same experience somewhere in the world of an incredible view. Another place where maybe you've experienced the presence of God. In the actions of a beloved pet. Sometimes you can feel God's love in the unconditional love of a pet who's always happy to see you, who licks your face and lets you know you're a special human being. Many single people depend on their pets to be their primary companions. There's so many people in this world today whose pets are their only contact with a living thing on a daily basis. That companionship and acceptance is the way many people experience God. You ever experienced God in a dying time? You ever held the hand of a loved one when he or she breathed his or her last breath and died peacefully? In the midst of your grief, there may have been a comforting feeling. You may have felt a hug from God in the hug given to you by someone who really cared. In a dying time, you may also have felt God's absence. Another place, what about the experience of God in a catastrophic event like a tornado or hurricane or flood or fire or explosion? You ever been in one? What did you experience? Did you feel anything about the presence or absence of God in the event? The bombing of the Murrah building in Oklahoma City and the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York City caused a great deal of discussion about the presence or absence of God. Survivors and families of survivors spoke of miracles and how God had protected them and their loved ones from harm. They experienced the presence of God. Families and friends of men, women, and children killed in those horrific catastrophes were asking questions relating to how the will of God could allow such a thing to happen. For the most part, they experienced the absence of God. Have you ever experienced God at a birth time, the birth of a child or the birth of an animal? I'm told that a woman, when stretched 40 ways from Sunday in the vaginal birthing process, has a hard time feeling anything godly, finding anything godly to feel, think, or say during that time. At the same time, the father of the child may be giddy from excitement in a heavenly moment or in a dead faint on the floor. The mother may have that heavenly experience after the pain subsides. The miracle of birth and the beginning of life often speak of the presence of God as Creator. Another place. Have you ever felt the presence or absence of God in a decision-making process? I mean a big decision, not just what am I going to wear today. There are many opportunities for us to experience God in that decision-making process, the revelatory moment. Another one, I hope you have experienced or will experience the presence of God in lovemaking. And if you're older and married and you haven't, it's time you did. Lovemaking is a vital part of the experience of life that God created us to enjoy. We should feel God in the midst of a time of lovemaking. What could be wrong with acknowledging the presence of God in a moment of a mind-blowing orgasm or climax? Many of us were taught that we weren't supposed to use the words God and sex in the same sentence. We don't need to leave God out of our sex lives. Have you ever experienced God in a moment of extraordinary growth? It can be an emotional growth, spiritual growth, even physical growth. I was a delegate to an annual meeting of a regional governing body, a synod of the Presbyterian Church, and we met in St. Petersburg, Florida. 2 people had already been nominated to be the presiding officer or moderator of the synod, and I decided to run against them. I came in second. And for the next 3 days of the meeting, I acted like a spoiled brat who didn't get his way. I raised objections just to be objecting. I threw the body into turmoil over technicalities. After the meeting was over and we were gathering our things to go to the airport, a man whose name I don't remember came up to me in a very loving and patient tone of voice, said, "Ray, I've been watching you make a horse's ass out of yourself throughout this meeting. You've been playing the game I win, you lose. You have a lot of talent and a lot to offer, and you don't need to play that game ever again." That man spoke the word of God to me, and it hit me like a ton of bricks. He was clearly an angel or messenger of God, delivering the message I needed to hear. In the next 5 minutes, I did some heavy growing up. I stood transfixed on the same spot because I knew I had just experienced the presence of God, and I was standing on holy ground. How about a moment of reward or punishment? I'm intrigued by victorious football coaches and players who say that their team won because God was smiling on them today. Well, what does that say about the other team? Have you ever experienced the presence or absence of God in a worship service? In my 24 years in the church, I experienced God in worship on somewhat rare occasions, but I may have been working at it so hard I missed God in the process. I have felt strangely warmed in baptizing a baby on Christmas Eve, listening to the choir sing a beautiful cantata, watching a child wash his mother's hands and offer her a blessing on Maundy Thursday, seeing a father place his hands on his daughter's head and offer her a blessing as she's being ordained a church officer, being told you said something meaningful in your sermon that you didn't remember saying and it wasn't in your notes. It's helpful to reflect on these experiences of God in nature and life events in a thorough fashion, reflecting on what they have meant to your life and faith, positively and negatively. This is your clay, and it's very important. Look carefully for signs of the presence of God in nature and life events every day. They are there. A personal story. When I was a 6-year-old, we lived in a big house the Baptist Church in Tylertown, Mississippi made available to its pastor. It sat right next door to the church building and right across the street from the elementary school. I remember great big rooms, open windows, an attic fan, and one big bathroom at the end of the hall with a four-legged bathtub. One night, my mother told me to get in the bathtub, take my bath quickly, dry off, get in my jammies, and get in bed, since it was way past my bedtime. Well, it was June and the sun was still up, so I didn't think I needed to go to bed, but I got in the bathtub and began joyfully to play in the soapy water with my rubber ducky. Suddenly, out of nowhere, but within the bathroom, I heard a very loud "No." I looked around and saw that I was alone in the bathroom. My quick childhood deduction was that I had just heard the voice of God telling me not to disobey my mother. I moved soap at lightning speed, rinsed off in one motion, pulled out the stopper, toweled off for a few seconds, jumped into pajamas, and ran and crawled under the bed, scared to death of God. I lived for years after that in fear of God, who watched my every move, even when I was in the bathtub. My fear was that God would verbally correct me again if I ever disobeyed my mother, so I concentrated on being the very obedient son. I even went for years without stepping on a crack in the sidewalk because of the old proverb, step on the crack, break your mother's back. There is immediate reaction, and there was immediate reaction to this traumatic event, but it was years later before that there was reflection on the experience. Then it became apparent that the probability was that a neighbor was walking his dog, which strayed into the flower bed underneath the window of the bathroom, and the man was telling the dog to get out of the flower bed. But that doesn't change what I experienced that night, nor what it did to my unconscious faith. Without reflection, I believed God to be the all-seeing eye watching me, the God to be feared, the God who shouted no at a little boy when he didn't do what his mother told him to do. Upon reflection years later, I rejected that concept of God and threw away the clay which had controlled my thoughts and actions for a long time. How important it is to reflect on the God experiences of your childhood and youth and adulthood. Then you can determine the impact they had on your unconscious faith. Then you can decide whether to use that clay to make bricks with which to build your house of faith today. See you next time.